Muddy and thin. Two very different problems that might make your mix sound like a mess. But are they really that different? My name is Dylan Pines, and today we are going to be investigating just that and finding a new, fresh way to get a balanced professional mix. Stick around. So we've got another tutorial for you. Today we're talking thin versus muddy, two very common problems in all different kinds of mixes. You've heard it said a bazillion times before at this point, just like, my mixes sound so muddy, or my drums sound so muddy, or my vocals sound so thin, or blah, 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 all that stuff. So we're going to be discussing how those two things are related and how you might be able to use the same technique to fix both. But before we get started, I do want to let you know we are giving away a free tool today. It's actually my favorite tool that Musician on a Mission has ever put together, the balance chart. So if you're interested in getting better, more balanced mixes with your EQ, this is actually the only EQ chart that I'll use while I'm mixing. So if that's interesting to you, then just click the link on screen or down in the description below and get your own free copy. I really think you're going to love it because even I love it. It's great. With that said, let's get into it. Thin versus muddy. I have over here 3 different mixes. You can see balanced, thin, and muddy. Now, all of these are actually just 3 different versions of a relatively unmixed song. But I wanted to use the same song so you could really hear the difference. Here's the balanced version, and then we'll just go through the other 2. It's really obvious to hear, right? I mean, surely this isn't rocket science. The thin version sounds thin, the muddy version sounds muddy. But here is the big question. Why? Why does the thin version sound thin? Why does the muddy version sound muddy? Now, these two are just 2 different sides of the same coin. They're just an out of balance low end. Now, specifically, we're talking about 100 hertz to about 300 hertz, somewhere in that range. If you have too much energy there, your mix is going to sound muddy. If you have too little energy there, your mix is going to sound thin. It is as simple as that. Truly, it is. So here's the crazy thing. I didn't do anything different to the actual mix of my thin version or my muddy version. I just threw an EQ on the balanced version and boosted or cut. That's all I did. On the muddy version, you can see actually, if I go in here, I add an EQ and I try to basically undo what I just did. Let me go around here. I believe this is around where I boosted, and you're going to hear the difference. Suddenly it's going to sound normal. And if I do a little bit of gain staging, let's do before and after. And it's the same thing with the thin version. If I go in here and I add an EQ, instead of doing a cut to counteract what I did earlier, I'm going to do a boost. And I'm just going to do a very wide boost around that same 100 to 300-ish hertz. Let's do a before and after. Now, obviously, going in and doing a huge boost or cut is not the solution to this problem, but you can see that the issue is not necessarily just like, oh, this one thing is too loud or this one thing is too quiet. The issue is that there's not enough energy in the low end. Now, that's obviously easier said than solved. There's a lot of different ways that you could potentially fix a muddy mix or fix a thin mix. For both of them, if you catch the problem early on, if you're listening, you've done a good volume balance and you're listening, you're like, this mix sounds muddy, even though I've done a good volume balance, or this mix sounds thin, even though I've done a good volume balance, then you're going to be able to add an EQ on your mix bus and make some tweaks. This is just what's known as mix bus EQ. You can go in, you can cut some of your lows, boost some of your highs. You can create a good foundational balance so that that issue is not a problem from the get-go. And then you can start your mix with confidence. We've actually got a great video on mix bus EQ. I've left a link in it down in the description. Go check that out if you're interested in learning more about that technique. But like I said, this is only if you catch it early on. If you are all the way through draft one of your mix and you sit and you listen, you're like, it's too muddy. Or like, it's so thin. That's not the time to use mix bus EQ. Mix bus EQ is great for creating a foundation. It's not great for making sort of broad fixes later on. At that point, you're just doing what the mastering engineer is going to do, and leave that to the professionals. So if you're dealing with muddiness, here's my favorite solution. Use what's known as the mute button method. So really what this is, it's just you going through your mix and muting one instrument at a time and trying to find the instrument where, that sounds so much clearer all of a sudden once it's gone. And there's probably going to be 1 or 2 or 3 different instruments that are your biggest issues. When you find them, you're going to be able to either go in and use an EQ to cut some of the lows, or you can simply turn the volume down. That might also work. It might just be too loud in the mix. So let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. I've got my mix pulled up right here, and there's a few instruments in here that to me are sounding a little muddy. On the whole, I just feel like this could be a more balanced mix. Let's listen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and mute one at a time individual instruments. And when I hear the problem just sort of go away all of a sudden, then I know what instrument I need to tweak. And not the kick. I feel like the snare could be a little bit thinner. It's a little too warm. So that might be one thing that I want to come back to. Not the overheads. Not the drum room. It's not really the bass. I kind of need the bass down there. That's getting more the literal low end rather than sort of just the low mids. Let's keep going. Ooh, that's a big one. Okay, so obviously this guitar part right here is having a pretty big low end issue because there was just a tone suck that happened right whenever I muted it. So I'm going to put that one to the side as well. Not so much that one. Not so much that one. Ooh, those acoustic guitars are also really muddying everything up. Finally, what you want to do before you go in and actually tweak is just mute all of the instruments that you found were too muddy and see if your mix feels balanced. If it does, then you've successfully found all of the instruments that you're going to need to turn down some of the low mids in. If not, there might be one instrument left that you need to go and check on. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm just going to go and mute all of these one at a time.
I don't wanna get bitter and twisted, but I don't wanna join in. I don't wanna get bitter and twisted, I just wanna stay comfortable in mine. I don't wanna.
And now it feels so much more balanced. Now, it feels like it's missing something, which it is because I just muted a bunch of parts. So I'm going to need to go and fix that. But that was the problem. Those three instruments were the problem. I can move on with confidence. Now, if I'm dealing with thinness, it's a little bit more of a complicated issue. Muddiness means there's too much of something, but thinness means there's too little. And if there's too little of something, that could be because there's just something that needs to be louder. Or it could mean that there's something that's not there to begin with. And that's a pretty common problem that you come across with thin mixes, is thin arrangements. So basically, the arrangement of the song is created as such to where there's just a hole down there. There's not a part that fills that space well enough. That means that, maybe it's a really low bass part, a really low kick part. Maybe there needs to be something in those lower mids areas. If, for example, there is a high voice part, a high acoustic guitar part, a low kick, and a low bass, that's a big hole to be in the lower mids that you need to fill. EQ might not fix that. You might need to literally write a new part to go in there. Another potential fix for that would be to double an existing part, but just an octave down. So maybe play that high acoustic guitar part one octave lower and subtly mix it in. It might not even change the tone all that much, but your mix will feel much more balanced. This also could be a problem with your recording. As they say, shit in, shit out. If you are recording really poor tracks, then you're not going to be able to fix what's not there in the first place. So if there's nothing in the low end because of how you recorded it, no amount of EQing is going to bring something up that wasn't there anyway. So you might need to go back and retrack, maybe choose a different microphone, choose a different mic placement, choose a different room to record in. There's a lot of different variables that could potentially improve the quality of your recordings so that you can get a more balanced mix by the end of the entire process. Another issue might be that you're being too aggressive with your high pass filters. There's a lot of advice all over the internet telling you to high pass everything, so that the kick and the bass have space to live. And while, I'm no stranger to telling you to filter stuff, I actually really like filtering, but you usually end up doing it too aggressively when you're starting out mixing. You need to come back on those high pass filters. You need to cut less of the lows. If you're cutting parts of the lows and you're losing tone, and you're not really cutting those lows for any particular reason, just because someone on the internet told you to do it, you might just need to back off. Take it from 300 hertz to 150 hertz. I don't know, I'm making this up, but that's definitely something that I see a lot with my students. Just come on back just a little bit. And finally, I would listen to your mix and ask yourself, which of these instruments should sound thicker? And what I mean by that is that, we are used to hearing voices and drum sets and pianos and guitars and all these things. We know what they should sound like in the world, right? So ask yourself, which of these feels unnaturally thin? There's a good chance that it is one of them. Maybe it's your kick or your snare. Maybe your vocals sound really thin. Maybe your acoustic guitar is lacking a lot of body. But if you can find sort of that one instrument, you might be able to go in and either retrack it or make some good boosts in that 100 to 300 hertz area to fill up the space that was missing in the mix. Now, of course, this is not relevant if you are doing electronic music. Synths can have whatever sounds they want. They don't have an acoustic representative in the world, in the real world. But the nice thing about that is that if you're having a thinness issue, you can just go into your synthesizer and fix it in the synth. You might have one particular synth that you listen to and you're like, wow, this sounds really thin. you could just go in, add a new octave below, and voila, thinness solved. So for you, I would just recommend tweaking with your synth sounds until maybe it's a little bit too muddy overall, and then you can go in with an EQ and start making your fixes with the mute button method. So that's going to about wrap it up for thin versus muddy mixes. Hopefully this has been really, really helpful for you. And before you go, don't forget, we're giving away a free tool. My favorite tool that we've ever made, the balance chart. This is amazing if you're trying to get better at EQing. I even use this tool while I'm doing my EQ mixes. If you're struggling with muddy mixes or thin mixes, grab this chart. I swear it's going to make the entire process so much easier. So if you're interested, just click the link on screen or down in the description below and grab your own free copy. And of course, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We like new people. We read your comments. You make us very happy. We make tips and tutorials just like this one every single week. Come join the party. We'd really love to help you out. So that's going to be it from me. This has been Dylan Pines with Musician on a Mission. And remember, create regardless.